I want to take you back to the beginning, to a time when I had nothing but a degree in drama, a stubborn streak, and a face the casting directors didn't quite know what to do with. When you're an actor with dwarfism, the industry has an entire menu of roles ready for you before you even walk in the door. They have the elf costume pressed, the leprechaun wig waiting, the comical sidekick lines printed in bold font. You don't even have to audition for those. All you have to do is show up and they'll say, perfect. We were looking for someone exactly like you. But here's the thing. They weren't looking for me. They weren't looking for my mind, my voice, my interpretation of a character. They were looking for a body type, a prop. And that wasn't why I became an actor. I didn't spend years in acting school memorizing Shakespeare and Chekhov so that I could hold a magic staff and say, right away, sir, I didn't pour my heart into the craft just to play someone's gag, someone's sight joke, someone's sight joke, someone's punchline. So I said a no, over and over. And here's what they don't tell you about saying a no when you're at the bottom. It's expensive, not just financially, but emotionally. It means years without steady work. It means temp job. It means standing in the back at parties, watching other actors climb the ladder while you're still at the first rung, because you decided the first rung wasn't worth standing on if it took you in the wrong direction. I remember the first time I turned down a role like that. It wasn't hard to see the disappointment in the casting agent's eyes, not because I wasn't right for the part, but because I was refusing the role they thought I should be grateful for. I could feel the silent judgment in the room. Who does he think he is? He should be glad anyone's offering him work at all. But here's the thing. If you start your career saying yes to roles that undermine you, you set a precedent. You tell the industry, this is what I am. This is what I do. And they will never let you be anything else. Typecasting isn't just a creative prison. It's a sentence you hand down to yourself if you accept it. So I decided, even if it took 10 years, even if it took 20, I would wait for a role that saw me as an actor, not as a height. I would wait for the kind of work that challenged me, scared me, and demanded something real. And yes, I suffered for it. I was broke. I was frustrated. There were nights when I sat in my tiny apartment, looking at unpaid bills, wondering if my principles were just ego dressed up as integrity. But every time I got close to giving in, every time I thought maybe I should just take that part in the funny little wizard movie, I remember that once you trade in your dignity for a paycheck, it's a hard thing to buy back. And let's be honest, this wasn't about proving the industry wrong. It was about proving myself right. About making sure that when I finally did get a role, I could walk onto set with my head high, knowing I was there because of my ability, not because I was filling some quota or stereotype. It took years before that call came. The one that changed everything. And when it did, it wasn't because I fit some preconceived image. It was because they'd seen me perform, really perform, and they wanted that. That's the thing about holding out. It's not about waiting for luck. It's about making sure that when luck arrives, you're ready for it. I've said no more times in my career than I've said yes. And those and no's, the ones that cost me sleep, friends, and rent money, those are the reasons I'm here today. Because each one of them was a brick in the wall I built around my dignity as an actor. A wall that says, if you want me in your story, it better be a story worth telling. And here's the truth I learned. The roles you turn down define you just as much, if not more, than the roles you accept. Because the ones you reject say to the world, I am not this. And in an industry that is desperate to label you, to file you away neatly into a box, that kind of declaration is powerful. Saying a no isn't about arrogance. It's about respect for yourself, for your craft, and for the audience who deserves better than recycled stereotypes. And if you can hold the line, if you can weather the silence that follows those refusals, you will force the world to see you differently. Not as a novelty, not as a body, but as an artist. And the best part, once you break that cycle, you don't just open doors for yourself. You open them for everyone who comes after you. Every actor with dwarfism who now plays a role with depth, complexity, and dignity stands on the ground we fought for. And that, more than any award, is the legacy worth leaving. When I first stepped onto the set of Game of Thrones, I knew what most people saw. They didn't see a leading man. They didn't see a romantic hero or the face on a movie poster. They saw a character actor, a supporting role, a clever quip machine. That's how Hollywood had trained audiences to think. But here's the thing, The character they handed me, Tyrion Lannister, was written to be more than that. He was sharp, complicated, flawed, vulnerable. And I thought, if I do my job right, if I give this man a soul, they're not going to remember his height. They're going to remember his humanity. For decades, Hollywood had a mold. The leading role was tall, square-jawed, physically commanding. Someone who could be the poster for a cologne ad, even if the scene was set in a dungeon. But life isn't made up of people who look like they stepped out of a catalog. Life is messy. People come in every shape, size, and walk of life. Why should stories be any different? And yet for so long they were. The idea that someone who looked like me could be at the center of a story, driving the plot, shaping the narrative. I was supposed to be the one in the background, making them laugh between the irreal scenes. Not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been told they didn't look the part. And it didn't happen because the writers decided to make a statement. It happened because I treated the role with the same depth and seriousness any so-called a leading man would. I made sure every word out of his mouth had intention. Every glance meant something. Every scene, no matter how small, was an opportunity to remind people, this man matters. People came up to me after the first season and said, I didn't expect to care about your character so much. And while I appreciate the compliment, it always struck me as strange. Why wouldn't you care? Because of his size? Because he didn't swing a sword like everyone else? Tyrion was proof that leadership, courage, and charisma aren't about physical dominance. They're about presence. And presence has nothing to do with how tall you stand. By the time the later seasons rolled around, I realized something incredible had happened. Tyrion wasn't just a fan favorite. He was the beating heart of the show. People were quoting him, dressing as him for Halloween, debating his choices as if he were a real politician. And most importantly, they weren't talking about him as the short guy. They were talking about him as the hand of the king, as a strategist, as a survivor. That's when it hit me. We had broken something. We had cracked that Hollywood mold. We'd shown that audiences are hungry for depth over dimensions. They want characters with intelligence, wit, vulnerability, things you can't measure with a tape measure. But I didn't get there by accident. Every scene was a fight. Not with the writers, not with the directors, but with the invisible weight of expectation. Because even when you're given a role like that, there's a temptation to lean into the safe beats, to make the character a little more palatable, a little more what people expect. I resisted that. I leaned into the complexity, the flaws, the darkness. I made Tyrion a man first, a Lannister second, and someone with dwarfism a distant third. And here's the real victory. Once audiences buy into a character like that, the industry has to follow. Suddenly, casting directors can't use the excuse, well, audiences won't connect with someone like you in a lead role, because they just did. They connected, they invested, and they demanded more. Redefining the leading role isn't about replacing one standard with another. It's about tearing down the idea that there should be a standard at all. Why should the center of the story be reserved for one narrow image of a person? Why shouldn't it be someone who looks like the world actually looks? I can't tell you how many times I've had people, young actors, parents, even strangers on the street, tell me that seeing Tyrion made them rethink what was possible. And that's the point. You don't just take the role for yourself. You take it for everyone who's been told, you're not right for this, before they've even read a line. The truth is, redefining the leading role wasn't about me. It was about audiences realizing that talent doesn't come in one size, that the weight of a performance isn't measured in inches, and that the most compelling figure in the room might not be the one swinging the biggest sword, but the one with the sharpest mind and the deepest heart. When I think back now, I realize Tyrion didn't just survive in a world built to underestimate him. And in doing so, he showed millions of people that they could, too. That's the power of changing what a leading role means. Once you expand the definition, you can't shrink it back down again. Because the moment you prove that the so-called impossible works, the impossible becomes the new standard. And from there, the only thing left to do is keep raising the bar. I've lost count of the number of times I've been told a no. Not the polite, sugar-coated, we'll be in touch kind of no, but the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. We just can't see you in this part, or we're going in a different direction. But I knew what they meant. Early in my career, those and no's came with an unspoken translation. We can't picture someone who looks like you as anything other than what we've already seen. Now, rejection is something every actor faces. But when your appearance is outside the so-called Hollywood norm, it's different. You're not just fighting for a role, you're fighting for the right to even be considered for one. And let me tell you, it's exhausting. There's a temptation to take every no as a personal verdict, to let it chip away you until you start believing the story they're telling about you. But here's what I learned. Rejection is information. It tells you more about the person doing the rejecting than it does about you. Their no was never about my talent. It was about their imagination, their limits, not mine. Of course, knowing that doesn't make it hurt less. There were nights when the rejections piled up so high that I wondered if it was worth it. If maybe the industry was right. Maybe I was asking for something the world wasn't ready to give. But every time that doubt crept in, I thought about the alternative. I thought about saying yes to the wrong roles just to feel accepted. And that to me felt like a slower, quieter kind of failure. So I made a decision. I would treat every rejection like fuel. Every time a door closed, I would use it as proof that I had to find a door they couldn't close on me. That meant working harder, training longer, becoming so undeniably good at my craft that the only thing they'd see when I walked into a room was the work. Not the height, not the stereotype, not the box they wanted to put me in. Just the work. And the funny thing about using rejection as fuel is that it makes you dangerous in a good way. Because once you stop taking a no as the final word, you stop playing by their rules. You start creating your own path. You stop waiting for permission. It wasn't because someone suddenly had an epiphany about inclusion. It was because I'd spent years refusing to shrink myself to fit their narrow vision. I'd made a career out of those and no's, because each one pushed me to be sharper, braver, more relentless. The irony is, rejection gave me the very thing it was trying to take away: resilience. It taught me patience when I wanted to rush. It taught me discipline when I wanted to settle. And it taught me to listen to my own voice above all others. I've seen actors take rejection as a death sentence, and I get it. It's hard not to, but the truth is, rejection can be the best training ground there is, if you let it be. Because every no forces you to ask yourself the most important question in any career, in any life. Why am I doing this? If the answer is up for approval, rejection will break you. But if the answer is because I love the work, rejection becomes something else entirely. It becomes a test you're willing to take over and over, because you know that the right yes-a will be worth every wrong turn. When I look back, I realize I needed those rejections. Without them, I might have taken the easy road. I might have said yes to the first job that came along, and who knows where I'd be now. Probably wearing prosthetic ears in the background of a fantasy movie, forgotten before the credits rolled. Instead, those rejections shaped me. They forced me to demand more of myself and of the people I worked with. They made me promise myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd prove not just that I belonged, but that the very idea of who belongs was wrong from the start. That's what turning rejection into fuel is all about. It's not about revenge or proving the doubters wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about looking back years later and realizing that every slammed door was actually pointing you toward the one that would finally open. And when it did, you'd be ready to walk through it without hesitation. So the next time someone tells you a no, don't just hear it as an ending. Hear it as a dare. Dare to get better, to get bolder, to make yourself impossible to ignore. Because when you turn rejection into fuel, you stop waiting for the world to see you. You start making sure they can't look away. When I think about my journey, it's not the awards or the fame that stay with me. It's the faces of the people who've come up to me after a performance or stopped me on the street and told me that seeing me on screen changed the way they think about themselves or about others. That's the part of this job that feels like it matters most. Because here's the truth. When you grow up looking different from what the world considers a normal, you are constantly reminded of it. People point it out without realizing they're doing it. In the way they look at you, in the questions they ask, and the roles they imagine for you. And if you hear it enough, you start to carry that weight. You start to believe that your difference is the whole story of who you are. I've been lucky enough to break into an industry that thrives on image and still somehow convince people to look past mine. But the victory isn't mine alone. It's shared with every young person who's ever been told they can't be the hero, the leader. It's for anyone who has been made to feel like their worth is tied to how closely they fit a picture someone else painted One of the things I've learned is that change doesn't happen because you tell people to think differently. Change happens when you show them. When you give them a story that doesn't fit the old narrative and let them feel something real. You don't have to preach. You just have to live in that truth so fully that it becomes undeniable. When audiences watched Tyrion Lannister, they didn't just see a man with dwarfism. They saw a man with a sharp mind, a wounded heart, and a resilience that could bend steel. They saw someone they could root for, someone they could relate to, even if they had nothing in common with him on the surface. And that's the magic of storytelling. It makes strangers into allies and differences into bridges. And yes, there's something powerful about knowing that kids who look like me are growing up seeing someone like them in a role that isn't a punchline or a prop, that they can turn on the TV or go to the movies and see that their size doesn't have to define their story. But what matters just as much, maybe even more, is the message it sends to everyone else. Because Breaking Stereotypes isn't just for the people inside them. It's for the people who've never had to think twice about their place in the world. When they see a leading role played by someone who doesn't fit the old mold, it quietly rewrites the rules in their mind. The next time they meet someone who's different, they don't see a less than, they see potential. They see a whole person. I've had people tell me that before watching me work. They'd never really thought about how often movies and TV reduce people with differences to the background. That once they noticed it, they couldn't unsee it. And that's the point. Once you see beyond the surface, you can't go back to pretending the surface is all there is. I'm not naive. I know one actor, one performance, can't undo decades of conditioning. But it can start something. It can plant a seed. And if enough people water that seed, through the stories they tell, the art they make, the way they treat others, eventually the landscape changes. Inspiring a generation isn't about giving a speech and watching the crowd erupt in applause. It's about knowing that somewhere, someone is making a choice they wouldn't have made before because of something they saw in you. Maybe it's an aspiring actor deciding not to give up. Maybe it's a casting director taking a chance on someone they might have overlooked. Maybe it's just a kid walking a little taller because they've seen proof that difference doesn't mean limitation. When I was younger, I didn't have that example. I didn't see people like me in roles that gave them dignity or depth to imagine it for myself. And now, knowing that I can be that example for someone else, that's more rewarding than any script or paycheck. But here's the most important part. Inspiring others to see beyond appearance doesn't mean pretending appearance doesn't exist. It means refusing to let it be the first, last, and only thing that defines you. It means showing through your work and your life that what matters most is the content of your character, the truth of your craft, and the courage you bring to the table. So if there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this. The world will try to tell you what you can be based on what they see. Don't let them. Show them something they didn't expect. Make them question the categories they've been taught to accept without thinking. And in doing so, you won't just change their view of you. You might just change their view of themselves too. Because the moment you prove that talent, heart, and humanity are greater than appearance, you give everyone watching permission to believe the same about themselves. And that's how a stereotype stops being a cage and starts being just a story we used to tell before we knew better. So, here's what I want to leave you with. I didn't get here because the world suddenly decided to make space for me. I got here because I refused to shrink myself to fit the space they gave. I said no when it was easier to say yes. I waited when it would have been easier to settle. I walked into rooms where no one expected me to belong and stayed until they couldn't imagine the room without me. You can do the same. You don't have to fit their mold. You don't have to play the part they've written for you. You can write your own. And you can make it so good, so undeniable that the world will have no choice but to see you for what you are. Not a category, not a stereotype, but a force. Talent is greater than appearance. Heart is greater than the box they try to put you in. And the moment you decide to live that truth fully, unapologetically, you don't just change your life. You change the picture of what's possible for everyone watching. So go, break the mold, smash it if you have to. And when they ask you how you did it, you can smile and say, "Oh, by being exactly who I am, and nothing less."